Hey class, how are you this morning?
Doing all right.
I'm good.
Glad to hear it.
I'm
going to play you guys a little YouTube video to start, and I'm going to see if, I think I might need to just go there and then share, so I'm going to do that. But it is on your PowerPoints that are posted.
A lot of people that have cats are
Okay, let's give it a shot now.
To make this talk, I have come to the President's office in the White House. I could have spoken from Rhode Island, where I have been staying recently. But I felt that in speaking from the house of Lincoln, of Jackson, and of Wilson, my words would better convey both the sadness I feel in the action I was compelled today to make. Our homes, our nation, all the things we believe in are in great danger. This danger has been created by the rulers of the Soviet Union. The future of civilization depends on what we do now, and in the months ahead. The worst deficit comes from a recession. And if we can take the proper action in the proper time, this can be the most important step we could take to prevent another recession. That is the right kind of a tax cut, both for your family budget and the national budget. I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president. I have never been a quitter. To leave office before my term is completed is abhorrent to every instinct in my body. But as president, I must put the interests of America first. My conscience tells me that only I, as president, have the constitutional power to firmly shut and seal this book. To use carpools or public transportation whenever you can. To park your car 1 extra day per week. To obey the speed limit. And to set your thermostats to save fuel. Every act of energy conservation like this is more than just common sense. I tell you, it is an act of patriotism. I'm not going to subject you to the jumble of charts, figures, and economic jargon of that audit, but rather we'll try to explain where we are, how we got there, and how we can get back.
Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once more in the hands of Kuwaitis in control of their own destiny.
I have a responsibility as president to deal with problems such as this before they do permanent harm to our national interest. America has a responsibility to stand with our allies when they are trying to save innocent lives and preserve peace, freedom, and stability in Europe.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve.
This nation has known hard times before, and we will surely know them again. What sees us through, what has always seen us through, is our strength, our resilience, and our unyielding faith that something better awaits us if we summon the courage to reach for it.
Okay, so that's a little bit of an idea of, what it is.
What's the strange link between farts and fat loss? The same place that creates.
For some reason, they're always trying to sell me fat loss, but I will continue to hold on to it. But the point is, right, is that, when we think about presidents and we think about kind of what their job is, and that's what we're going to do this week, is we're going to think about what it is we want from a president. How does a president behave? How does a president lead? How does a president speak to the people? And so we're going to talk about that today, and we're going to talk about that a little bit on Wednesday. We're probably going to talk about that a little bit on Friday. But we're going to talk about it in lots of different ways. One of the things I want to talk to you guys about is the presidential election has been called for President-elect Biden. And so there are a couple of places where there will be recounts because the margins are really, really small. That's typical, okay? But even with those recounts, he has the electoral advantage that he needs in order to win the electoral college, okay? So there's going to be a few things that go on. It's certainly within the rights of candidates to call for recounts if they're beyond the automatic, right? It's certainly within the rights of candidates to contest the outcome of the election, and that's normal, all right, to a certain extent, that they're asking for every vote to be counted. And so that's what has happened, right? That's what we're talking about here with this election, is that, it's hard to count a whole bunch of votes, right? Especially if they are secure. It's actually much easier if they're insecure votes to count them. And so it's a difficult thing to do whenever we're talking about the processes that they go through. All right, so let's talk about the presidency. I think that I'm not sure Eric is on, so I'm going to take roll really quickly before we get started. And so let me do that really quickly. Hold on. Okay, attendance is live as of right this second. So you have 2 minutes to weigh in. So let's talk first about what you think a president should be. What do you think a president should be? And so at the time I put this together, it was early last spring. And so there were lots of candidates. There were several candidates for people who were talking about maybe getting in the race for the Republican Party. And there were about 17 that had gotten in the race for the Democratic Party. So we know that it came down to a nomination between the two major parties, and that's who I have here. But you know, Bernie Sanders there in the middle. He's an independent. He is and was running on the Democratic ticket. But we have the two major candidates for each party were Joe Biden and President Trump. So my question for you is this, right? And I want you just to answer in the chat. What is one word that you would use? What do you think that a president should be? What do you think a president should be? And remember, attendance is live. You still have about 38 seconds, so do that.
I'll fix those in a second.
Thanks, Eric. I appreciate that.
Sorry, I was getting conspiracies according to Dan's class. So.
Got it. Leader, honorable, anything else? What do you think a president should be? Just 2 words? This is surprising to me. Experienced, honest, dedicated, smart, persuasive, pragmatic, diplomatic, transparent, energetic, genuine, virtuous, integrity, knowledgeable, passionate. Okay. When we talk about the things that we want from a president, it's really difficult for us to, you know, find somebody that is all of these things, right? Because you also have to be ambitious. You also have to be someone who likes politics. You also have to be someone who is going to be engaged in this process. So, you know, really intelligent, understands foreign affairs, is able to be diplomatic, has empathy for the people, is, you know, on and on and on. This is difficult. It's difficult for one person to be all of those things. And so a president is a hard thing to be, right? And so part of that is a president wears a lot of different hats. So this is Richard Nixon there in the middle. V for victory. And a president should be lots of things. A president has to be the chief. This is by the Constitution. The Constitution formally is saying that the president is the chief diplomat and the head of state. In other words, the person that the world sees when they look at America is the president. They have treaty-making power. They have pardoning power. So that means that they can pardon anyone who has been convicted of a federal crime. They have veto power. They can veto Congress. It can be overturned, right? But they have that power. Hard to overturn it, as we discussed last week. They're commander-in-chief of the military when it is called into service. Prior to World War II, there were only a few. The Marines essentially could be called, were at the head. The president was in charge of the Marines. They were active duty all the time. No one else was. After World War II, we have had an active duty military, which means they've been called into service. And that's how it's been interpreted. But it says, you know, when Congress calls them into service. So in other words, Congress could say, you know what, you're not active. You're not active duty. And then the president is no longer commander-in-chief. The president has appointment power, appointment to appoint the heads of the bureaucracy, but also judges. The president is the chief executive, and this is the most important power of the president. The most important form of power is this. It's the power to faithfully execute the laws of the nation. That's specific in the Constitution. Faithfully execute the laws of the nation. And it doesn't matter if they vetoed it and it was overturned. Their job is to faithfully execute it. It doesn't matter if that law was passed 20 years ago and they disagree with it. Their job is to faithfully execute it. It is their responsibility. They also have some limited legislative power, in particular 2 things. 1, the State of the Union, the ability to say, hey, this is what I want. And it's a given time each year. And then number 2, that veto power mixed with you know, if Congress can't decide on when to go into recess, the president can do that. But that's it. It's never happened. Okay, Congress has always said we can figure that out for ourselves. Thank you very much. All presidents since the beginning of time have had limited formal powers. It's the use of informal powers that sets them apart from one another. It's how well they use it. And this is really important. Okay. The modern presidency is going to begin with FDR. He is elected to 4 terms as president during 2 huge national crises, the Great Depression and World War II. He's going to personalize the presidency using the radio. His fireside chats with Americans at home. This is a technological advantage that he has. Everybody had a radio in their house, and everyone felt like they knew him. They felt like the president was talking to them, that he cared about them, because it was the main conduit. There is nothing like that today. I mean, there's Twitter, and there's texting, and there's the various social media sites, and there is cable news, and there's broadcast news, and there's the radio. But none of us are all listening to one thing, the way that everyone was listening to that radio address. FDR accomplished his original goals and then set new ones. And it was clear, and he made it clear to Americans that that's what he was doing. He is the president that all other presidents want to be. He wielded enormous power, and he reshaped the federal government. It is because of him that presidents have as much power as they do today. And it is because of him that we have as many social welfare programs, as much infrastructure. For those of you who are from Oklahoma, one of the issues in Oklahoma is that our bridges are about, a lot of them, 90 years old. And they're 90 years old because they were built through the Works Project Administration, and they haven't been rebuilt. You can still see sidewalks and buildings that say the WPA was here. You know, basically it's a symbol to put people to work, and built infrastructure where there wasn't before. I've told you guys many times, I'm from Pryor, Oklahoma, Cultural Center of the Universe. One of the things that happened during the Great Depression is that the federal government came in and dug out a bunch of rivers and made them into lakes in Oklahoma. And so while it's not true that Oklahoma has more shoreline than any other state, they do have a lot, and it's man-made. One of the things that happened in Pryor, Oklahoma, or actually in Mays County, and you can see it all around, is the GRDA. The Grand River Dam Authority was created, or the Tennessee Valley Authority is another example of that. They use hydroelectric coal-fired plants to create energy and also provide water to the entire city of Tulsa. But the energy, Pryor is a public power community, right? So when we talk about a lot of these things, when we talk about what started this infrastructure, there wasn't running water. There wasn't electricity in rural areas until FDR created it. This informal power is how presidents really wield power. So here's informal power 1, persuasion. This is the most important one. It is their power, and their success is dependent upon their power to persuade. And they need to persuade 2 groups of people. They need to persuade the people of the United States, but more importantly, they need to persuade Congress. It depends on the personality of the person holding the office, right? The goals of the office holder, and also the timing of events. A president is going to have a lot more power if there's just been an attack on the United States. It's much easier to persuade people whenever they feel threatened. But that personality also really matters. President Clinton was very effective at working with a Republican Congress. They got a lot of legislation passed. And there was a lot of compromise in getting it done because of his personality to do that. If the goals of the office holder are in line with the goals of the American people, or are in line with what Congress wants, or they can be persuaded to get there, then they're going to be much more successful. The power to persuade is the most important power. Informal power 2, the presidential establishment. Now, FDR had that first, that power to persuade, but he created the second. The president has advisors to help make policy and fulfill the duties of chief executive. The executive office of the presidency is essentially going to be created by FDR to help him shape legislation. The cabinet is going to be key advisors to the president, but the president's staff is completely loyal only to the president. And this is important because the cabinet and the EOP, they serve at the pleasure of the presidency, but they are responsible to Congress and to the people. Okay? So if the president appoints someone and the judges say, and Congress says that's illegitimate, we didn't approve that, then that person can no longer serve. But that's not true of White House staff. These are the people who are closest to the president, who see the president every single day. How many of you ever watched The West Wing? Let me just say yes. So raise your hand. No one? This hurts me. Okay. Your homework assignment for this week is to watch the first episode of The West Wing. I think that's fair. Okay. So it's on YouTube. It's easy. First episode. And then we talk about, I think it is on Netflix actually. The first lady or gentleman, right? At this point, it's only been the first lady, but we have our second gentleman, right? And so there's power there too. Okay, there's power there too. So everybody's gonna watch the first episode of The West Wing this week? All right, we'll talk about it next week. Okay, informal power 3. Legislative agenda setting. So FDR is going to claim the leadership and agenda setting power for the president. And he's going to get it. He's going to say, hey, the president can lead this. FDR is going to shift the president's power from that of simply executing policy to making it. And here's a great example. And this is exactly what I mean about setting the agenda for Congress, but also it's important because it goes back to that power to persuade. All right. And really, President Clinton is doing a good job persuading the people, okay, rather than persuading. Rather than persuading. Can you guys see President Clinton now? Amelia says yes. Okay.
It's fair and it will work. I propose, indeed I have insisted upon, $500 billion in deficit reduction to be locked away in a deficit reduction trust fund. We will be making historic cuts in the deficit by making historic cuts first in government spending, then by making high-income Americans pay their fair share, so middle-class Americans will be treated fairly in the tax burden for a change. 75% of the new taxes proposed fall on the top 6% of the American people, those with incomes above $100,000. Now, some of the critics of this plan in Congress prefer instead to cut Social Security or health care or tax benefits for elderly people just above the poverty line or working people just above the poverty line, so that the wealthy won't pay so much. I'm here tonight to say to you and to the American people that I will draw the line here. We have to reduce the deficit by reducing the unfairness of the tax patterns of the 1980s, and once again, asking all Americans to do what is right and fair. So we can't simply balance the budget on the backs of the old, the sick, the veterans, and those who work hard but are just barely making ends meet. It's not right. Let's look at what's at stake here. First of all, this chart shows that if we do nothing, the inherited deficit, what we found when I came into office, will go up by 1998 to about $400 billion a year. If this deficit reduction plan is passed, we will cut $500 billion out of the deficit. That's the difference in this line and that. As all of you know, and as you pointed out in various ways in the last few weeks, I just got here. And I may have a lot to learn, but I didn't create the red line. What I'm trying to do is to change the red line and bring the yellow line in. And let me say, to get the yellow line down here, we have to bring about an affordable health care plan for every American. And that's the next big step. But look what this deficit reduction.
I showed you this because I wanted to remind you that this is something that no one wanted, right? To increase taxes. And he was able to convince the American people this is the right thing to do. It's a patriotic thing to be able to take care of our people and our government for the future. So that's that power of persuasion, but it also set the legislative agenda. And by setting the legislative agenda, then that meant that Congress had to react, okay? So informal power 4, going public. This is also part of what he was doing. He went to the people and he said, hey, he actually said this, he said, America, it's important that you do your patriotic duty and pay more taxes. And the people said, we'll do it. And they were excited about it. And they called their members of Congress and said, hey, raise our taxes. And they did. Going public is the act of going over the heads of Congress to gain direct support from the people. And this is direct support from people in policy promotion, but also crisis manager comes on that. So let's talk about policy promotion first. The Reagan tax cut, whenever Reagan went to the people and he said, hey, you guys want lower taxes, right? And they went, yes, we absolutely do. And they called the members of Congress. And Clinton did the opposite and said, hey, we went too far. We have a giant deficit and your children are going to inherit it. And they said, yeah, raise our taxes. And they went to the members of Congress. It requires public support. So an example where this did not work, George W. Bush did a lot of town halls after his second election. And he went around saying, hey, we should get rid of Social Security. And people said, no, we shouldn't. We really like Social Security. And so he wasn't able to do that in that same way, right? So the role of crisis is also a good way for the president to increase his approval ratings, but it has to be that the crisis has been managed effectively, okay? So in response to 9/11, people felt that George W. Bush did exactly the right thing, and his approval ratings went through the roof. He managed the crisis and he unified the people and was a morale leader, okay? And I think Eric is going to step in right here and talk about that, about unifying and being a morale leader and what role that has for a president.
Yeah, so one book that caught my eye over this weekend, and it's some words that have been used a lot in the last couple of weeks. It's a book by John Meacham. It's called The Soul of America. Really good book. He's a great author, probably my favorite author. But there's a quote in there from FDR during his 1932 campaign. And he's talking about the presidency. And he says, the presidency is not merely an administrative job. That's the least of it. It's more than an engineering job, efficient or inefficient. It is preeminently a place of moral leadership. All our great presidents were leaders, and it thought at times when certain historic ideas in life of a nation had to be clarified. So, FDR, a lot of other presidents, there's stuff by Truman in there. It's a really good book kind of talking about the moral leadership of our presidents throughout time. The Soul of America by John Meacham.
Thanks, Eric. And so moral leadership is obviously a little bit different than morale leader, but it's the same sort of concept, right? In that what the job of the president is as far as people are concerned. We, the people, is to be able to look at the president and feel like the president is on our side, the side of America. And if the president can't do that, especially in a time of crisis, the president's going to lose tremendous support from people. So informal power number 5 is party leader. The president is the de facto head of his or her party. The president represents to the people the party's goals. So if, for example, right now, we could clearly say that the Republican Party is represented by President Trump, the Democratic Party is represented by President-elect Biden. With a majority win in a national election, the president can more easily persuade members of Congress with his or her party. And I'm saying this on purpose. By that, I mean a majority vote, not a plurality. And so by getting a majority of the vote, President-elect Biden got more than 50%. By doing that, not just a plurality, he's going to have a much easier way to persuade the members of Congress within his party. Let's do this. The majority of the people are behind me. That's an important thing to be able to claim. I'm going to show you, this needs to be updated. No, this is correct. Sorry, I did update. But I need to put a red thing here. But I just wanted to be known, these public opinion polling from Truman to Trump. The first year of presidency is always best for the president, okay? With the exception of one president, okay? So there's always an exception. But for Harry Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Jimmy Carter, Reagan, Bush, Obama, and Trump, and Obama, the first year average, right, was all lower than their averages over time during their whole presidency. So Truman's going to drop to 41, and that's pretty low. If it's below 50, we're going to put it in the red. If it's in the 50s, we're going to put it in the yellow. If it's above 60, we're going to go green. So we have Bill Clinton is going to jump from a 50 to a 57. He's actually going to go out as the most popular president since Eisenhower. That's because this is average over time, but he's going to go out as the most popular president since Eisenhower left office. This is pretty significant, all right? He dramatically increased. President Trump stayed about the same, but he increased a little bit during his presidency. Every other president has dropped, okay? And that's not unusual. The first year is usually better for all presidents. When we talk about power, there are two kind of factors that we use. We talk about prestige and public opinion. And so I'm talking about public opinion for a reason. It matters, okay? High prestige is something that you can't get while you're in office. So for example, President Trump could never achieve high prestige. He would always be low prestige whenever it came to his party and to Congress because he'd never served before. President-elect Biden is coming in with high prestige. Now, if he keeps high public opinion, great. If he doesn't, if he has low public opinion, he's still going to be able to accomplish things, but it's going to be harder. Okay? So President Carter, who had been a governor in Georgia, he had political experience, but it wasn't Washington experience. So he had low prestige. And because over the term of his presidency, his public opinion was kind of low. Let's look at it really quickly. It goes from a 75 down to a 46 as his average, right? With that, that means that he doesn't have a lot of power in Washington to get his policies through. Now, someone who had amazing high public opinion but had low prestige is Eisenhower. Eisenhower's going to have really low prestige because he was a general. He was not in politics at all, but the public loved him. He had high public opinion, and so he was able to accomplish things as well. LBJ, low public opinion, though, comparatively, his average was still 55. It wasn't terrible. But he was able to accomplish a lot because of the high prestige he enjoyed from being a senator for many years. For a president, the sweet spot is right here, FDR. Like I said, all presidents want to be here. High prestige and high public opinion. If President-elect Biden can get his public opinion numbers up, the higher they are, the more power he will have to be able to get his policies passed. Now, the power of the president vis-a-vis Congress. We talked about how Congress has much more formal power and has much more power whenever it comes to the Constitution, right? But over time, and because of the informal powers, we see a big difference. Sometimes presidents can make a real difference in domestic short-term policy. But it depends on the president. They have to have some prestige or some high public opinion to be able to do that. One of the things that President Trump can turn to in terms of short-term domestic policy is tax cuts, right? He could say, well, I accomplished that. But he's not going to be able to look at much other than that. And so he doesn't have a really good legacy as far as domestic policy. Short-term foreign and defense, the president absolutely wins, right? So the president changed a lot of our relationships in terms of environmental treaties that we're in, our relationships with members of NATO, our relationships around the world. But in the long term, the Congress is also going to have a really big play in foreign and defense changes, foreign policy and defense changes. And so his impact is going to be minimal. Long term, Congress has the most power over domestic policy. There's no question about that. Just like short term is the president, domestic long term, it's Congress. That's who wins. So you really, if you're a president and you really want to make domestic changes, you need Congress on your side. Because you can't do it without them for the long term. In order to be effective, and this is really important, this is one of those questions I asked you. And this is a question I like to ask on exams, just as a note. I think it's a good question. What does a president need to be effective? They need to be able to persuade Congress and the public to effectively manage the bureaucracy, to have a clear legislative agenda. So, in other words, to say, for example, well, I've got a plan, but not to produce a plan, that's not going to work. You have to say, this is what I'm going to do. A clear legislative agenda matters. You have to manage crises well. If people do not believe you're managing a crisis well, you're not an effective president. You must be respected by Congress and the establishment in general. You need to unify your party as well as the nation. You have to also unify the nation to be an effective president. A high electoral percentage and approval ratings are always helpful. And a growing economy really helps a president be considered an effective president. So, I have a polling question for you. Theoretically, I have a polling question for you. Hold on. Darn. my poll is not here. So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask if you have any questions while I put this poll up, and I will make sure that I can see my chat, which I couldn't see before.
Yeah, so if anybody ever needs book suggestions filling the open time for your holiday season coming up, let me know. Federal government books, great reads over the fire during your Christmas break.
Well, and also you can use them in discussions with your family. And if the discussion doesn't work well, I mean, they're often heavy. So
Yeah, that's what I do. One of my largest books, the Ulysses S. Grant, almost 1,000 pages, but really good if you ever want to know about Civil War and after Civil War Reconstruction time. But look at that thing. Like, get a family member, like, crazy uncle coming for you. Well, my favorite book, I don't know if I have a favorite one. Well, I do have a favorite one. He was in the media lecture. At the end of the media lecture. I don't know about my least favorite book. I'm trying to think what book I haven't gotten through. I will say I don't like books that alternate storylines in the chapters. Some do that. Alexis? Like one chapter will be one story and the next chapter will be another. Drives me crazy. Jennings' formal powers are written down powers. So Constitution, laws, all that kind of stuff.
all right, I finally got the poll going here. So let's go what some of these questions are. Is the essay due on November 20th? There's some conflicting dates on Canvas syllabus. Thank you. Yes, it's due on the 20th. I think the syllabus says the 20th, and I think it's been fixed on Canvas also, but I'll make sure. But it is due on November 20th. That way it's done before you guys go for Thanksgiving. That's in approximately 2 weeks. I'm actually going to spend some time talking about the paper on Wednesday. So please tune in from that. Okay. From that to that, tune into that. There we go. All right. So I will be talking about that. It is due on the 20th. Your topic was due last Friday. It's worth a good 5 points, which seems like a nice thing. Also, it means that your fellow will look at it and at least give you an idea if you are, if there's a red flag. If there's a red flag, they'll certainly peek in and let you know that that's a problem. You have about a minute left on the poll, and it looks like we got about half of you in so far. So come on in on the poll. I want to know what you think. The most significant barrier to presidential effectiveness: low public opinion rating, divided party power in Congress, slowing economy, or high turnover of staff or cabinet. All right. From whence come the formal powers of the president? They come from the Constitution. So the Constitution specifically gives those formal powers. It's in Article 2. Article 1 has to do with the Congress, and many other things also give Congress power in the amendments. But the formal powers of the president come specifically from Article 2 of the Constitution. Looks like 169 of you. It's a decent turnout. We got about 4 left. Ooh, 170. Look at that. All right, so let's see what you guys said. For some reason, there we go. I can see it. It says we're struggling to get your data. So I'm trying to find it. It says nobody answered, which we all know is not true. You know what? It's a rough day today. Okay, there we go. So 65% is going to say the most effective, barrier is divided party power in Congress. About 20% are going to say low public opinion. 12% slowing economy, and 4% high turnover of cabinet and staff. Informal powers come from the president themselves. That's why I listed them. I mean, basically, these are things that were developed over time. If the president is effective at this, then they have that informal power. But if they're not a good party leader, if they are not good at managing a crisis or promoting policy or going public, these are going to come from, scholarship where we have looked at what makes a president powerful. But it's something that the president has developed, or the office of the president has developed since FDR, the modern presidency. All right, I guess that's it for today. You guys get out early. Boomer.
Sooner.
Sooner.
Sooner.